It's self-correct spelling. When I get back to read it, I'll have words that I didn't put in there.
Right. Or like your abbreviations.
One nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Kind of pulling my chair.
Thank you for coming. This is a joint meeting on the budget, and we wanted to get together, the two committees, so we could get a presentation from Tom and Paul, so we'd understand what our basic numbers are before we begin the long budget process. And before we begin the meeting, we do have minutes. Right after we decide on the last joint minutes, which everyone should have received, then we will have a presentation from Tom and Paul. Yeah. Oh, we didn't send them out?
I don't think we got them.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
And then we would, it was in the packet.
Was there anything attached to the packet?
And then we will have Tom and Paul make their presentation. We're asking you to hold questions. They have a very long presentation. And then we have invited a moderator. Rebecca Townshend is coming and it will be helping us this evening so that all of us can participate. With a large group like this, if you are the moderator, it's very difficult to participate in it. This is a really important meeting. We all wanted to be able to participate, so thank you very much, Rebecca, for coming and helping us this evening. Thank you. Michael?
This is being televised
Yes, it is.
or recorded or both?
I believe it's live.
I want to just echo Marie's comments. I think the school committee over the last couple weeks and over the last couple months has been very encouraged by the select board's willingness to engage us on a number of different topics, and we're incredibly grateful for the opportunity to meet tonight to discuss items that obviously we traditionally have a lot of discussion about. And so I think tonight is going to be a very beneficial night for both committees to get a good picture of what FY15 is going to look like. And I'm looking forward to the dialogue that takes place after the presentation. I do have the minutes.
No, you do.
I do have the minutes.
Okay. And also, Rebecca has put note cards if you want to use them to write down your questions, because it's a long presentation. And also, LCTV has asked us, since we're sharing microphones, be sure to move the microphone in front of you if you are speaking, because that way it'll broadcast a little bit better. Thank you.
So, sure. Originally scheduled was an interview for the Tech Advisory Board. We've been unable to get a hold of our applicant, so we're going to move past that tonight. So I would make a motion to accept the minutes of the July 25th, 2013 joint meeting.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
I haven't read them.
Oh.
Has anyone read them?
They were mailed out.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Opposed? Abstain? Thank you. The minutes have been passed. Any questions before we begin? Then, Tom, Paul, it's your show. Oh, yes.
What I'm going to be presenting on the whiteboard is also being handed out, so everyone has a copy if they want to make notes or anything of that nature. It's all basically the same material. Mark, it's all the same material, so I think they're all set. I basically want to start with just a quick overview of the Proposition 2.5 calculation, give some historical background on what some of our trends are when it comes to revenues and expenditures, work up to our special town meeting that we're expected to have on November 4th. That will kind of set the FY14 budget. FY14 budget will basically be finalized at that point in time. And then that will set us up for some projections going into 15 and some assumptions that I have used that can actually be discussed with folks at that point in time. I'll show you kind of where I project the town is at this point in time going into, again, we're a little over a third of the way going into 14 and setting us up for 15. The first thing, again, I wanted to go over was the Proposition 2.5 calculation. Property taxes basically make up about 77% of our general fund revenue, and are, as I will show you very shortly, are the only ones that are actually increasing at any type of pace. Our local receipts, our state aid, not keeping up, and I'll show you that in a bit earlier. But basically with the Prop 2.5 calculation, we have the FY 2002 fiscal year. We basically start with the prior year tax levy. In this particular case, we don't have FY11 shown, so I'll go over to FY13, but you'll notice that the 39,256 is our basis for starting the FY13 Proposition 2.5 calculation. We simply take a 2.5% increase on that number above. We add in our new growth, and we come up to what is known as the levy limit. To the levy limit, we add in any types of debt exclusions that occur. Debt exclusions, for the most part, the high school is the biggest one right now. We still have a couple outstanding, some issues with Blueberry Hill and Wolf Swamp. The town has a Eli Way drainage project out. This is the debt service for FY13, and we have what is known as our maximum allowable levy, from which we need to set aside X amount of dollars to take care of property tax disputes, valuation disputes, and what I have defined thereafter as the net property taxes. Again, if we move this forward for FY14, we're starting off with the $40,000,003, moving that up to FY14. This is simply a 2.5% calculation. We are estimating the new growth at this point in time to be at least $125,000. It's actually a little bit more than that, but not all that much. That gives us a levy limit, setting us up for FY14 of 41.5. We have the debt exclusion calculation, and we'll be carrying $125,000 estimated at this point in time for our abatements or allowance for abatements and exemptions. Really want to get into FY15. Again, once we start getting this, again, the same calculation. Not going to get into anything further than that. People can follow the math. I do want to point out on the very bottom, we do have the actual tax levies for FY12 and 13 and what the tax rate was, 12 and 13. This is an estimated tax rate for FY14, 2220, and an estimated tax rate for FY15, given no overrides at this point in time. Taxes actually increased from FY11 to 12, 4.98%. We had the big influx of debt service for the high school. Again, you can see what it was, our debt service excludable debt in FY12 to FY13. That's where the big jump is. And again, taxes went up almost 6% last year. They are not anticipated to go up that high in FY14 or FY15, roughly, and I'm anticipating probably about a 3% increase in FY14, and we're back normal to a closer 2.5% in FY15. Geez, now I can't even see my notes now.
I'll put capital lights on.
Yeah. Operating revenues, again, I just want to set up some historical trends. If you can just slide it a little bit over. Maybe property, again, this last column, I don't know if we can go up a little. This last column is FY15 estimated. We have the historical trends, and we can see as far back as FY11, property taxes made up of 75% of our operating revenues. That number has increasingly gone up year by year in small increments, where in FY15, it's estimated to be about 77%. It's about 77% of what we're estimating for total revenues in that year. That increase from FY11 to FY15 is 17.84%. So again, it is a pretty steady increase over those 4 years. When we look at state aid, going back to FY11, it was $5.1 million, made up roughly almost 10% of our budget. We're currently looking at, it's down to about 9% of our budget. Estimated, this is a level fund estimate for next year. We're currently, the cherry sheet stated that we were going to get about $5.4 million from the state this fiscal year. Looking at the increase from FY11 over to FY15, that increase over those 4 years in state aid is 4.44%. We are not getting a lot of money from the state. That is why mainly we're getting the reliance on our own property taxes. The third line down is the local receipts. Again, back in FY11, it roughly made up of 7.27% of our budget. It's currently down to just under 7% of our budget. The trend over FY11 to FY15 is a 9.53% increase. So our local receipts are doing halfway decent, nothing extraordinary. As you can see, the only one that has any significant increase is the property taxes. The last column is just our enterprise funds, our water, sewer, and solid waste enterprise funds. The receipts for those fiscal years are shown. Those budgets, those revenues go right into, as user fees, right into offset the cost of again, our water and sewer projects, the operations of such, and also the solid waste enterprise, the recycling center, the trash pickup, so on and so forth. Again, from the graphical standpoint, you can see, scroll down a little. Again, this is our property taxes. This is the only one that shows kind of a steady increase. It's not an extraordinary increase, but does show the increase to a certain degree. The state aid, the local receipts, and the enterprise funds, all relatively stable. So again, our reliance mainly is on property taxes at this point in time, as it should be no surprise to anyone. From the operating expenditure standpoint, we're looking at going back through the fiscal years, breaking it down by function, general government, public safety, education, planning and community development, so on and so forth. We've remained relatively stable as far as the percentages of the budget. I do want to point out that general government in FY11 did include the IT department. It was before the consolidation, so that number is a little bit inflated in FY11. But you can see that the school department made up roughly a 55.13% of the budget back in FY11. Debt service, which we'll talk about again a little bit, was 3.05%. As we went into FY12 and started paying off the high school, and we moved over the IT into the school budget, the percentages they changed a little bit, not drastically, but they did change. Again, the school budget, roughly about 55% of the total. It's all these numbers now, beginning in FY12, are a little bit diluted because of the increase in the debt service. So if you just scroll across, Tom, we can go all the way through, the FY14 budget, and this includes what I'm anticipating will happen at the special town meeting coming up. We're going to have very, very consistent percentages of the whole budget, all the way going over from FY12 over to FY15. The school budget being around 54%. And the other thing I did on my own is that if I excluded the debt service, the school budget actually maintained a level of about 57% all through that trend history. Just down below that is the graphical presentation. I think people know that the school department's budget is the biggest one. It kind of sticks out like a sore thumb here, but it is what it is. All the other budgets, they all make up small pieces and are all divided. that if we added up all these other columns, we'd be, up around, just below what the school budget is. Wanted to get into a little bit of employee benefits. Benefit comparison. Employee benefit comparison. No, there should be one within caps. The title.
Employee benefit budget. Then I got fund balances. Budget and stressors.
The second one is the one we've got, Paul. The second one from the.
The second one?
We've got.
No, actually, there's two. I have one, it gives the employee benefits. I mean, you have it in front of you. It's on page 4. It's the historical perspective of employee benefits, where the school and town comes into play. I mean, the biggest thing here is that we're basically maintaining our employee benefits. The breakout between school and non-school employee benefits, roughly at a ratio of 58% for the schools and 42% for the town. That trend has remained relatively stable for the 5 years that I show here, and I don't anticipate any major changes going beyond that. That's the next one that we'll get into. Going into employee benefits, I just wanted to show you, at this point in time, what I'm projecting for, as a base, the FY14 budget for employee benefits, and what I'm projecting for FY15 at this point in time, and I will go over my assumptions basically one at a time. For health insurance, we have budgeted, currently we've budgeted 3.8 in FY14. I'm anticipating about a 6% increase. It's very early in the game. It is a conservative estimate. We have the percent change here. Some of the cost factors are going in the town's favor at this point in time. Scantic Valley, who is our health insurance provider or our intermediary with Blue Cross Blue Shield, Tufts, and Health New England, we're changing some of the Medicare Part D, the way that we operate for retiree drug prescriptions, and it's going to drastically reduce some of the cost to our retirees and to the town, effective this coming January 1st. Our biggest program right now is Medics. It has well over 100, I think it's like 140 individuals on there, and I think we are dropping the cost of that by almost 33%. So there will be some savings in FY14. As far as the employee numbers that are also included in here, it's just too early to tell what the employee numbers might be. I will say that I do believe that 6% increase is a conservative estimate. The contributory retirement system, there is our current budget for the contributory retirement system. That is mainly composed of non-school employees. However, there are a good number of school employees, school custodians being an example, that do participate with the Hampden County Regional Retirement System. Their actuarial studies call for about an 8% increase through the foreseeable future in the local town appropriations. So that is where I come up with the 8% when it comes to the contributory retirement system. The health insurance is such a small line item. I put in a token $500. Medicare and Social Security tax at 7.5%. Unemployment, I'm not expecting an increase in unemployment at this point in time, unless we get through the budgetary process and see that we're going to have layoffs. I do not anticipate there being a need for anything more than a level funding in that particular line item. Liability insurance, we will be going up. Basically, what we've gradually put on our insurance, our property rolls, is the high school building. It was off our property rolls for a number of years as it was covered under the builder's risk. It has come on. This building came on just around September 1st when folks moved in here. So I'm anticipating an increase, a little increase on the property, and just an increase in overall insurance cost. We have our OPEB liability, which is also part of the employee benefit section. FY14 was the very first year that we made it part of our operating budget. It is done by a policy of the Select Board that calls for 0.25% of the tax levy going in towards our unfunded liability, and that's where we come up with the increase of $2,300 to $115,000. This OPEB study is something that we have to do biannually. We do not have to make that amount or make that appropriation in FY15. So overall, we're seeing, I'm anticipating almost a $460,000 increase in employee benefits alone for FY15 at this point in time. I think time will tell how these pan out. We'll have more information. The Hampden County Retirement System is usually known around January 1st. Health insurance numbers are usually known around March. And, again, as time goes on, as all this budgetary process develops, the numbers will become more and more solid. Going into, what I want to show you kind of is just a preview of FY14, the things that have to be taken care of at the special town meeting coming up in November. Roughly at this point in time, we need $385,000 to balance the town's budget. That $385,000 is mainly coming from two areas. It was the amended votes at town meeting on the school budget, and we also had an overdraft of about $85,000 dealing with the property tax dispute with Twin Hills Country Club. We have a few other things that we need to take care of. They're not reoccurring, so they are not in the operating budget. We have a FY 2015 triennial revaluation due. We have a bill of prior year that we need to take care of for our recycling center and solid waste pickup. We have some casino mitigation money that the Select Board is contemplating, and it is proposed to have a $10,000 operating line item increase for the DPW to maintain Bliss tennis courts. I have included this $10,000 as I move forward in setting the FY14 base. The Select Board has not finalized any of these proposed warrant articles at this point in time, but again, they are in my numbers, and basically they're not going to make all that much difference whether they make it or not, quite honestly. A $10,000 amount isn't going to break it. We do need the $385,000 to balance the budget, however. Now these numbers, people are, yeah, we got to go back to the first one, and we got to move over on the tab. Go overview. People are not going to be able to see all that much, but given all the factors that I just went over for FY14, what you have here is a little history of the 14 budget development, as it was voted by the Select Board back in March, as it was voted at the annual town meeting, and basically as I'm projecting it to include the actions that we'll be taking at the November 5th town meeting. Property taxes are raised to the full levy limit in FY14. State aid is as per the cherry sheet, or the numbers allotted by the state. Local receipts, we were able to increase the local receipts by over $200,000 from FY13 to 14. Some of the increase was attributable to the meals tax that was approved at town meeting a little over a year ago. Motor vehicle excise taxes on the upswing. Excuse me, and there were a few other areas in local receipts that were also on the upswing. The school special revenue amounts is an amount that the school department budgets from their non-general fund sources. And then we have our water, sewer, and solid waste recycling revenues coming in. In total, we're going to be using about $604,000 of free cash at this special town meeting coming up. We were, on that previous sheet that was shown, our certified free cash was $991,000, and that's going to leave us with, I believe, about $387,000 to go through the remainder of the fiscal year. We can scroll up. Oops. Again, that's where the free cash utilization of that amount, as I said before, $385,000 of that is strictly used for operational stuff. The other amounts are the casino mitigation, the reval, things that are not operational but do need to be reconciled when we go to set the tax rate. We have a small amount in these bond premium reserved for debt service amounts. These numbers disappear, as you see, in FY14. They are a result of financing, that we have done in the past. We have basically, we're given premiums on bonds that we must give back to the taxpayers over the life cycle of the bond, and these are the amounts based upon an amortization schedule. This $174,000 is a result of reduced debt service from the refinancing of Blueberry Hill and Wolf Swamp. It is money that we have in reserve that, again, we must give back to the taxpayers. We raised it through the property tax debt exclusion process. We can't overcharge them. It goes back as almost as a net offset in FY14 and disappears in 15. Again, I don't want to get into too much of the complications with that, other than just to let you know that it does disappear in 15 when you look at those sources. As far as assumptions on the expenditure side, on the next page and the one following will have a little more detail. But what I've done is, as far as salaries are concerned, for FY14, I've basically taken, for FY15, I have basically taken the FY14 number and increased them by 3.5%. That 3.5% on salaries is comprised of the 2% cost of living increase that is witnessed in most collective bargaining agreements that we have currently in place, and a 1.5% step increase that is part of the salary scales or salary schedules that most of the collective bargainings also have in place. That 1.5% is based upon a historical trend that was done a while ago. It is probably at this point in time a conservative estimate, but note that my estimates, when I look at salaries, maybe we should go down to page 2. When we look at salaries, my estimates all will have a 3.5% increase. I've level funded all expense accounts for FY15, estimated to level fund them, with the exception of 2 areas. In speaking with Tom, he believes that the high school electricity account is probably going to be short by about $150,000. I've built that number into the FY15 budget. And in speaking with Mike Rabel, that the additional maintenance, the filters and things of that nature for the high school, he has estimated at this point in time to be about $65,000. That number is also built into the FY budget estimate. Debt service is as is. The employee benefits we kind of went over earlier. The bottom line, when we look at all this, and this is summarized in the final page here, so I wouldn't get too hung up on all the detail here because there is a lot. But the final amount that I'm projecting at this point in time to be, that our budget is short, is $682,000 for FY15. $682,000 for FY15. In summary, if we can just go to that budget stressors, this kind of summarizes all that. Thank you. This kind of summarizes all that numerical data that was just shown previously. From our sources are expected to grow roughly only about $1.14 million. The majority of that is coming from the property tax calculation, where property taxes alone are expected to jump up $1.1 million. We have some supplemental revenues, some sources from ambulance, some daycare reimbursements. This might get a little bit higher if motor vehicle excise tax revenues come in higher. But right now, I am estimating just another $28,000 coming in from outside sources. And this is all general fund. This does not include the enterprise fund. So I'm anticipating that our revenues are only going to grow by $1.14 million in FY15 at this point in time. The hits that we're going to take on that, or the uses, are, as I said before, contractual salary increases eating up basically the whole thing. $1.17 million in salary increases. Again, that is across the board, a 3.5% salary increase estimated at this point in time. 3.5% comprised of the 2% COLA and the 1.5% step increase. The health insurance alone was going to roughly go up by a little over $200,000 anticipated. The pension assessment by $170,000. The liability insurance, $28,000. Again, these were numbers that we got over a little bit earlier. Utilities at the Long Meadow High School, $150,000. And as I mentioned, the LHS maintenance, $65,000. Looking at this estimate, and again, I think it's a pretty good summary of what we really need to pay attention to for FY15, there is your shortfall. Again, we're back at that $680,000 figure. There's a couple other considerations that need to be taken, need to be reviewed, because there are some other things out there. I know that the school department and school committee is considering full-day kindergarten, estimated to be roughly maybe $250,000 plus benefits. We may have some final LHS costs that we need to take care of. That's a question mark. The capital program, I have funded the capital program as per the select board's policy at this point in time at 2%. You recall last year that it was funded at a number greater than 2%, and I'm sure that will be a topic of discussion for the select board to take up also. Right now, it is only funded within the budget numbers that I have at 2%. We have an OPEB liability outstanding right now of $38.4 million. That number does not have to be made up all in 1 year, but usually you have a 20 to 30-year cycle to raise that money. That is still a liability that we have in our books and needs to be considered in the whole budgetary process. And there are going to be other matters. I didn't go out and ask every department saying, what do you have, some unexpected expenditures in FY15 at this point in time, but I'm sure there are going to be a few that are going to add basically to that $680,000 deficit. The only other, there's one last page on here, and that I just asked Tom for some circuit breaker information, and I don't have the slide to show you that, but it is on page 11 of the handouts. And it kind of gives the history of the circuit breaker, and very pleasantly surprised was the FY14 number coming in at 1.379 million. I don't know, Tom, if you want to say anything more on that.
Yeah, I mean, circuit breaker is state revenue that we receive. It accounts for about a third of our special revenues that we budget. It's kind of tricky to estimate each year because it is based on the previous year's expenditures. Student expenses for specific programs have to reach a certain threshold before the formula starts kicking in to give a reimbursement. The state was able to fund FY14's allocation at 75%, which is the first time they've reached that level since the program started, I want to say back somewhere in 08 or so. So we did budget just over $1 million, and the allocation that the state right now is giving us is $1,379,000. We're also allowed to carry forward any unexpended funds from the previous fiscal year. It's in a revolving account. The state also then gives an allocation of any unallocated funds at the end of the year. So in July, we received an additional payment from the state for FY13 that you're seeing, that $128,000 that the school committee voted last night to include in their FY14 budget as revenue to be used against special ed expenses.
Thank you. That was an incredible presentation. Really appreciate all the work that went into that. Stephen, do you think we'd be able to put this on the website so the electronic version would be available for residents if they wanted to look at it?
Sure. Sure.
Good evening. Again, I'm Rebecca Townsend. I'm helping to moderate this discussion tonight. Just a quick background. I'm a communication expert. I facilitate meetings. I teach people how to communicate. This is something that I love doing. Just as you hire an engineer to help build structures, communication experts help facilitate discussions. My role is to be neutral. I listen. I will record your comments, your questions on poster board that's on that side over there, and on this side once this screen goes down, if that's all right. Okay.
People have the hard copies.
Super. My goal is to have a civil discussion, and to do that, we have some ground rules that you can consider. What ground rules you would like to follow. I know high-quality deliberations always involve some analytic as well as some social components. And the analytic background has been provided by both Tom and Paul, and our job is to make sure that socially we comport ourselves as civilly as possible. So over there, I'm going to write what you figure you want to be ground rules. And ground rules typically involve some measure of comment on speaking, comment on listening, so rules for speaking, rules for listening, and rules about attitude. So what would you like to see as the ground rules for you all tonight? Yes, Michael.
Listen carefully and with respect.
All right.
These are perfect. I think you're.
What have you got?
I mean, each person gets a chance to talk. I think.
Everyone gets a chance to talk. Make sense?
One person at a time.
Richard, Mark, Liz, anything that you want to see enforced? Alex, John?
You guys are good?
All right, so let's stick with these three basic ones. That's what I'll enforce. I would also, let me go over here. Where might stay right there. I might also suggest that we approach tonight's discussion with a spirit of collaboration. Our job is to get the basics for the budget, to understand what it is, what components are part of it, to set a budget schedule, and if we can do so in a spirit of collaboration, knowing that both boards are looking out for the town's best interests, that spirit can help guide us. So, with that, what questions do you have for Paul and Tom, and what questions do you have generally? John?
Paul, I have a question about this OPEB liability, and we only started paying into this last year.
We only started putting it in the operating budget.
First, what is it for everyone's benefit?
The
And why do we have to pay into it?
OPEB liability, by law, we are obligated to pay retiree health insurance, town of Glen retiree health insurance up to 50%. And basically what we have are a number of retirees who are going to be living a number of years beyond FY14. And we have a number of employees who they calculate on that will soon, or at some point in time, be eligible for that retirement benefit. And it's an actuarial determined number that is the amount that we would need in the bank today to pay for all those benefits that we promised in many years to come.
But it's my understanding we don't really need to have the money in the bank today because we only pay a certain percentage of that, or is it, what, about $1 million, let's say, each year?
There is a pay-as-you-go program that we pay about $1.1 million worth of retiree benefits in every year. That is true, that is due in every year. But from a financial standpoint, these do have impacts on our balance sheet, and they are something that the credit rating agencies look at when they go to rate our bonds. In the past and in the future, it will be a bigger concern if the town of Long Meadow is not addressing that OPEB liability.
One final question. Are there some towns that do not
Yes.
appropriate money or do anything
Yes,
about this?
there are many
They just
towns,
wave it
there are
off.
many towns that have ignored it.
And there's no penalty for that, or?
At this point in time, there is no penalty, there is no mandate, to make any type of contribution other than what your current year obligation is.
Thank you.
Follow up on that? Just to follow up on that point, I think, as Paul alluded to, if it hurts your bond rating, then you will pay higher interest. So there may not be a penalty from the state per se, but towns who don't address it are penalized through higher interest rates.
Go ahead, Mark.
I had a couple of questions about it, Paul. On the first page, put down an estimated tax rate. And I think people need to understand that a tax rate is based on value of the property divided by the revenue that you need to raise. And
So I am using the FY13 approved valuation for my 14 tax rate estimate.
okay. Thank you. So that's the tax rate with no change in value and no...
That is correct.
That answers one. The other one, I guess, is I guess that applies then on page 2 where you said you put in what the property taxes are, that the property taxes, but aren't the property taxes generally, although we're now at and have been for several years at a 2.5% levy limit, they basically are the fill based on here's how much we have to raise in revenue and state aid, local receipts, and well, we won't even talk enterprise funds because those are directed funds, but state aid and local receipts are, aren't under the control or flexibility of the town?
Well, the FY15 tax rate that I use on page 2 is also shown on page 1. And basically is showing the maximum allowable levy limit that we can raise. So it's making the assumption that we're going to use that maximum allowable levy limit. The only missing piece of the calculation right now is the certified new growth in 14, which becomes part of the base for 15. But it is an assumption that that is the maximum allowable amount. Not to say that we have to raise that, but I'm just making the assumption that we could raise, or making the calculation that's the amount that we could raise with the assumption that historically we have bid to our max.
Richard?
Yeah.
You have one more question?
I had a bunch, but if you want to...
We'll start with that right now.
Go ahead.
Okay,
Go ahead, Mark. I just want to indicate, just so that people understand, on page 6, we talk about potential uses of things at fall town meeting, and one of the line items there is casino mitigation, $100,000. I think it needs to be said that we will be seeking partial or full reimbursement from the casinos as part of the allowances under the Mass Gaming Commission, even though we need to appropriate the money and it's reimbursement, so it may not be a net expenditure. I think people...
If I can interrupt you, so we're going to be seeking reimbursement for that. Just want to make sure we... Okay.
Right. And the last question I had was for Tom, was just, is all circuit breaker money targeted program specific, or is it generally available to the school committee to apply for whatever programs are necessary?
And I think the best way to describe it is that it should be used towards expenditures that qualified, that got you the money in the first place. So it is really dedicated for special expenditures. Now, it doesn't have to be out of district tuitions. It can be used for in-district programs. We have selected to use it to offset out-of-district tuitions. But it is all special ed related.
Okay. All the county showstopper, you said salary increases equal budget increases. And in the presentation, it says salary increases equal to budget increases?
Yes. On the budget stressors, yes.
Yeah, that kind of ends the show, doesn't it? I guess my concern is the fact that we have over the last several years brought forth a substantial amount of evidence that the 2% set aside for our facility improvements is grossly underfunded with our slipping resources, and we're adding resources. We just put this beautiful new facility on board, which I think Mike's asking for $65,000 that wasn't in there last year. I don't know if it's 65 in addition to what he had, or 65
additional to what he had.
Okay, so in addition to what he had for the old high school, so that's a sizable chunk of money. I wonder why we're not looking at some scenarios, bringing forth scenarios on anticipated growth of what we need to be doing with our resources, because this statement says override, and yet we haven't said override, because we're not sustainable if the salary increases equal our budget increases every year. It's plainly we're going to slip. Do you have viewpoint?
Yes, I do. Again, there are a couple of conservative estimates in here. State aid for FY15 is level funded. We have seen some increases over the last couple of years, but I don't know where to throw the dart on that one and what, as an increase, we're going to get from the state aid. Contractual salary increases, again, there is usually attrition that happens, and that number is probably also a conservative estimate. Lastly, I will also throw in the fact that historically, in balancing the fiscal year's budget, we have used reserves. It is not included in my FY15 projection. We're using $385,000 to balance FY14. If we used an equal amount for FY15, which is a possibility, it would drastically reduce this to a more manageable level, but it doesn't take into those factors where I listed under considerations where you're speaking to capital. It doesn't really address those other matters, though.
Is that a best management practice to use reserves to fund operational deficiencies?
No, it is not.
Annual operation deficiencies?
No, it is not. And that's why I have 0 in FY15 at this point.
Right. I understand that. Thank you.
I had a question, and being new, I don't understand all of this completely, but when you're saying that we've got to spend $385,000 out of reserves to address the shortfall, when we were at town meeting and this budget got approved, it was based on the consensus that the schools were giving up $300 and some thousand, and the town was going to supplement that from its budget. But now it's being said that we're taking that out of reserves, so in some ways it looks like I'm implying that it's that $385,000 is due to the school committees wanting their budget approved, whereas nothing's been cut or eliminated from the select board side. Now, perhaps I'm misinterpreting that, but could you perhaps clarify for me?
I would say there's a misinterpretation of maybe what, people can give their own opinions of what happened on the floor of town meeting, but the school department budget was raised. There were a couple articles that were changed, and there was a net increase of $300,000. There was talk about making other changes to other articles for capital that came up, but that never happened. Those changes never happened in the other budget that would have offset this. So the final product that came out of that was an unbalanced budget of that $300,000.
Does that address your question?
I think.
Well, let me,
I'm not, when the negotiations were going on with budget and, the contentious atmosphere that took place, it was, each side would give to come to a compromise. And I know that school committee had given and reduced what it was requesting. And it was my interpretation that town was going to give to come to that number.
I think I know where you're going, and I can say, yes, those assumptions and facts are true to that point, but they were not carried out in that fashion.
If I can,
It was meant to be carried out, and they were not carried out in that fashion.
I guess why?
let me take a stab at that, Janet.
Okay.
When the budget gets brought forward to town meeting as published in the warrant article, it's a $56 million pie, sliced in certain predefined ways. The article that was presented at annual town meeting was not necessarily a reflection of the negotiations and dialoguing that had gone on prior to the publishing of the warrant.
Okay.
So the budget that was presented was, I believe, the select board's recommended budget. During town meeting voters carved off a larger slice for the schools at $300,000 So they changed how the slices were arranged.
Correct.
But did not offset that cut or that additional funds the schools did not vote for any offsets, which had been discussed. Those votes never actually took place.
Okay.
So the budget that was presented, that was published, was balanced. And taking 300,000 from just the general, just taking it out of the pie and putting it towards one use, threw the budget out of balance. Had there been specific votes to identify offsets and process the things that had been discussed, there would not necessarily have been an unbalanced budget. Those votes didn't take place. So, as we sit here today, going to fall town meeting, we're fortunate to have certified free cash to fill that, to rebalance it. If we did not, the general government side would have to absorb that, and that would likely mean cuts of services or personnel.
Okay.
If I can, Jan, the specific issues were, and I'm going to talk, was the agreement was that there'd be additional money in the school committee operating budget, and that would come out of a couple of sources. One of the places it was supposed to come out of was what we're now seeing Meriwether Williams down to Wilkin and Woodside Drive project, which we had partially paid for out of operating budget and partially paid for out of bonding. There was an agreement that we were going to change at the town meeting to have that more fully bonded. The rest of that would come out of the operating budget, and therefore the operating budget would be balanced.
Okay.
That amendment was never offered at the town meeting.
Okay.
So therefore, the town budget that was passed had $360,000, I think was the number, $358,000 was the number, more in expenses than we had in revenue.
Okay.
And when some of us said, we have an unbalanced budget, others said, we'll take care of it in the fall. And that's what we're doing.
And this is how we're taking care of it.
Right.
Thank you all for your explanation.
I just want to make sure I have this accurately recorded. So in terms of town meeting voters carved out 385, but voters did not vote for the offset at town meeting.
I don't think that's, voters were not asked to vote for the offset. The amendment that would have changed the funding for the capital project was never put on the floor.
Nor asked to do so.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, all of you, for explaining that.
I had you at pie, didn't I?
Actually, I found that very confusing also, but the use of free cash is not the best practices, but we've been doing that for how many years?
We have historically used amounts. I think the prior year was closer to 500,000. I've seen it as high as $1 million plus. We are using it. They're reasonable amounts given our certified free cash amount, but again, it is not the best practice to operate under.
And I'd just like to comment that, because I think I've said this before, when the town ends up the year with free cash, it means that for one reason or another, our budgeting was not the same as our actual. We spent less than we budgeted. And it could be that our budgeting wasn't accurate, or it could be that, we've had somebody left a department and we didn't replace them, or so there were unexpended funds for salaries. Sometimes our legal fees, I know, disappears. And the biggest one that the town has year after year is, from year to year, without any notice, nor can we plan on it, Scantic Valley, who's our health provider, coordinator, they have declared a premium holiday or half holiday. And so even though you have to budget to pay your premiums every month, if there comes a month that we don't have to pay premiums, that ends up with a bunch of money. That's usually a couple $100,000, right, Paul? Or that we'd end up with.
Half a month would be, $250,000.
Right, so you can never plan on it, but in fact, it's money we overtax people on that we never spent. And, so it's almost as damaging overtaxing people as undertaxing people, but you never know the line item that you're going to overtax, that you're not going to need.
Right. The other area that it comes from too is when you under budget revenues. We don't know exactly what's going to come in from motor vehicle excise tax. As I said, FY13, in closing out, it came in like $80,000 more than we had budgeted. That $80,000 goes into the calculation for free cash. So it's your revenues that exceed budgets, it's your expenditures that are less than budgets.
John?
in line with what Mark was saying, I just would like to remind everyone that the school department return money, they turn back money at the end of our fiscal year. And, I'm sorry, Tom, I don't want to put you on the spot, but do you recall how much that was, roughly?
For FY13, it was $195,000.
195,000. So does some of that go towards that 300,000?
Well, it doesn't go directly towards it. It becomes the free cash number that was certified, and it is now the free cash number that's taking care of it. So there's not a direct relationship, but yes, it is a part.
It goes into free cash?
Yes, it does.
Good, all right, okay, thank you. But that is a problem we've had over the years of matching how much we raise and how much we actually spend. And there's lots of reasons for that with the schools because of legal fees during the course of the year, placements of special ed students. All of those are variables that are a bit beyond our control.
Alex?
So this is a question for Paul. Looking at the OPEB liability, I had a recollection that maybe this was a year previous to 24, that we had $250,000 for OPEB.
A year or so ago, we did appropriate, I think it was a little bit over $250,000. It was actually taken out of reserves and not built into the operating budget, but there was an article to take $250,000 out of free cash and put it into our OPEB liability trust fund.
Okay, and what your assumption here is that we would be up to $115,300 for next year as part of our operating budget.
That is correct, and that's actually based upon a select board's policy that was created about a year ago.
Okay, and the $250,000, obviously that's a higher percentage than the 0.25% that you were discussing before.
The 250 was basically an affordable amount at the time. We had a high balance in free cash remaining at the end of the fiscal year, and because the high balance was there, it was suggested that a portion of it would go towards the OPEB trust, and the selectmen made that decision to use that amount.
And one other question, now the operating stabilization fund, I mean, what is that? I mean, could you just address how that affects this picture?
Well, the operating stabilization fund is a fund that can be used for, anything that we need to appropriate money for. It is set aside separately, which is kind of different from free cash. It's set aside separately in its own bank account, so it accrues interest. But it basically can be used just like free cash. It is not certified annually, as basically it just rolls from year to year and accumulates. It has been the position of the Finance Committee and the Select Board to use that as the real rainy day fund. The last time it was used was when we had the October 2011 snowstorm, where we had to take money out of there to start paying back some of the town share money that we had incurred. But it is not used very often for normal operating type of expenditures, and that's by more of choice. It can be, but it is truly the rainy day fund of the town.
I just want to follow up on the comment about John, as you described it, the problem of having the revenues or having the free cash left over. Mark, you talked about, over budgeting or under budgeting. I just want to clarify for folks that, you set your tax rate and approve your budget once a year. And other than a special town meeting or some kind of large effort, you can't really go back and do that again. And so projections of revenues and expenditures are budgeted very conservatively, because it's much better to have free cash at the end of the year than to run out of money for operations during the year. And that's why we take a conservative approach. And I guess I would say that the money is, like as we're seeing tonight, the money is in fact being returned to taxpayers through the continued provision of services. As I mentioned, if we were short $300,000 and didn't have free cash, pretty dramatic cuts would have to be made. Because we were conservative in budgeting and we have free cash, we are able to balance the budget and continue to provide the services that the residents of Long Meadow expect. So I just want to clarify that it's part of a conscientious strategy to safeguard the interests of the taxpayers in the provision of services.
Yeah, Paul, on the OPEB liability, what is the anticipated increase per year?
Off the top of my head, I don't know, but it's probably grown at a rate of 6 or 7%. I mean, it's growing fairly substantially.
And we're putting in 2%?
We're putting in 0.25%.
0.25%.
0.25% of tax revenue.
Tax revenue. How is that equate to the requirements? Am I asking?
It's probably
calculate?
1/6, 1/7 of the additional money that we would need.
1/6 to 1/7. Okay. What's your viewpoint, your views and recommendations on OPEB liability?
My recommendation would be that 0.25%, I mean, I think we should appropriate money annually, but that 2.5% be addressed gradually and increase gradually.
And your recommendation would be?
Maybe increase it by 0.25% per year until we get up and finally meet with the annual contribution, the true annual contribution rate to address the liability is.
Okay. I thought I remembered a figure from last year. We had an assigned liability at that point of 56 million. Is that a figure that I made up, or was that a figure that was floated?
I don't recall the number. The only thing that I can say is there are different calculations based upon different payment methodologies. So you may have heard that number based upon a different payment methodology.
Right. And I agree with you, the methodologies. The only thing that we know for sure is that our OPEB liability is going up every year, and that is a direct payment that we must make.
It is a payment that annually, a portion becomes due annually, that we are just basically taking care of a little bit more than we're annually obligated to do.
Because we're paying out X amount of dollars every year, period. And it is going to increase at a predetermined rate unless we do some intervention in future hiring practices or how we do work. This is a curve that's going to continue to skyrocket.
Right.
Can we just follow up with that in a second? Because John Fitzgerald made a comment that we pay OPEB as we go now, correct?
Correct.
And
well, we pay the current liability.
We pay the current liability, and that current liability right now is $1.2 million a year. Okay, so if we had an angel come down and drop in and totally fund our OPEB, our prior retirees' OPEB liability, okay, then what would our current funding necessarily have to be in order to just put in for current employees being here another year? In other words, the $1.1 million consists of two things: actual medical payments for retirees, but also there's a liability we're incurring for current employees for when they do retire, or will retire.
I don't have that number, Mark, off the top of my head. I don't want to make one up. I don't know.
All right. So, because the point is that I think something on the order of the 0.25% may not be far from what a current employee liability is. And what we're trying to do is also catch up to prior retirees. So even if we had OPEB fully funded, our requirement to add to that fund every year, unless the stock market was skyrocketing and the fund was growing faster than we were using it, would not go away.
I just want to ask Paul a follow-up question too. The numbers that have been reported, I don't know them off the top of my head, but the kind of, for lack of a better term, doomsday large-scale numbers that are out 30 years from now, those projections are to some extent based on certain existing policy parameters, and there could be policy changes for future retirees that could lower that number. Do I understand that correctly?
There could be policy changes. One thing that will have an immediate effect on that is when the next study is done, potentially the fact that, as I explained before, Scantic Valley was changing around its drug, the way that it funds its drug Medicare program. And as I said, the Medix Blue Cross and Blue Shield program was dropping by almost 33%. Well, that lower rate will be calculated in a future actuarial study and will have a dramatic impact on what that future liability is. So yeah, there are policy decisions to be made, some that are controlled by this board, some that are controlled, the state legislature a year ago had a study on OPEB liabilities throughout all the communities through statewide. There are proposed changes for the eligibility of retirement benefits for retirees that, if I understood correctly, never really got discussed last year when the study was complete, but will be studied again this year. I know it's members of the Finance Committee, a couple members of the Select Board are going to a meeting on Saturday. I believe it is a topic of discussion on that agenda. You'll hear about what the state is actually proposing. So there are a number of areas that can be controlled or lowered, not necessarily that take a direct financial influx.
So the current projected liability today may not necessarily be the current projected liability in a few years.
It is absolutely true. Our current liability, we've had, I think, 3 studies done now, and every time we've had a study, our unfunded liability has come down, even though our funding has been minimal. The couple of reasons that have transpired is that the rate of healthcare inflation was not materializing to the rate that was assumed in the actuarial study. School lunch was privatized between maybe study 1 and study 2. That took a number of eligible employees off of our potential liability. And there were a couple other slight factors that I can't, quickly come to mind, but that's why, again, from year to year that we've had these studies, they've always come down. And again, it's not because of an influx of funding.
Maria had her hand up first, and then Richard and Liz.
So actually, bringing down that number for the retiree health plan, probably we're looking at millions when we have savings and OPEB. The number's got to be coming down substantially if you're talking 30% down. Yeah. And also, we were talking about other things that can happen, and there's a House bill coming up, and I think the hearing is on Halloween, and they're talking about the major changes on the paying of the health care and when retirees can start accessing it, and that is going to make a dramatic change. So though we can put money away, the major changes are really occurring around the corner. So I think it's been a bleak picture, but speaking to Paul and then hearing what's happening this year, we are in many ways bringing this down, and there's potential for it coming down even further. Right. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm trying to visualize Mark's budget angel. I've been sitting there trying to think, what would this thing look like?
You write a check, Richard.
Yeah, comes in with a fat checkbook. I'd like to, key off your point, because we've had 2 people who said, hey, the sunrise is looking beautiful. Is it also a fact that our liability could increase due nothing more to labor negotiations for the future?
The OPEB liability would not increase as a result of labor unless you want to start changing percentages that you're going to pay for health insurance.
Well, I'm just saying it could affect.
Well, it could, yeah.
Right, so it is, trends be what they are. We don't know what the future is. If we did, we'd have a lot more money than we have today, but I just didn't want to leave that on the table, that everything is okay and it's all disappearing, because we won't know for 30 years, and I won't be here.
Then you'll be the budget agent.
I just want to make sure I've got this accurate. Could the liability increase? I first heard no, and then I heard a sort of yes, and I want to make sure this is accurate.
It is, it's a yes and no answer.
So
I mean, yes, it could increase based upon certain factors, or it could actually go down based upon certain factors. So it's yes and no. Depending on what the factors are.
We were just trying to get 2-2.
Got it. Liz?
My question is for the OPEB liability. Is it for families, like spouses? After they retire, is that part of it?
Yes, the retiree and their spouse are eligible for health insurance through the town. So it would be for spouses, and if they have eligible children at the time of retirement also, yes.
Right, and if the people pass away, then ends?
If the retiree passes away, the town has not accepted certain provisions of the law where the surviving spouse comes in and pays 100%. So if the retiree passes away, then our liability would be affected. If the spouse passes away, I guess there would still be some effect because they'd no longer be on there. But like I said, if the retiree passes away, it would have a bigger impact because the surviving spouse pays 100% of the medical cost.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I don't know who had their hand up first, so you'll have to do this.
Okay. Well, just following up on healthcare, I hope this is a fair question. what percent of our town employees are not part of the town healthcare system? That is, they have a spouse working, well, say in the military or in private sector or whatever, and they have, quote, a better deal, so they go under the spouse's plan. Is that a factor in our discussions?
Is it a factor in our discussion? I guess I don't really have an answer as to how many employees do or do not take the health insurance. I'm going to estimate there's about maybe 400, 450 employees that do, out of maybe 800 or 900 that are eligible, and I'm kind of ballparking this. Would that have an impact? Yes, people moving on or off our health plans are going to have an impact, positively if they are moving to a spousal plan, or if it's a husband and wife, that one is going to the husband is going to one employer, and maybe the spouse or the wife is working for the town of Long Meadow. They kind of split into two singles plans as opposed to one family plan. I mean, there's all sorts of different options there.
Okay.
John, if I could just answer it a little bit more, if I could just answer his question. A couple of years ago, we had a concern that we were offering too many health plans, and it was too complicated. But in fact, not all of our health plans cost employees the same amount of money, and therefore they don't cost the town the same amount of money. The state mandates a level of healthcare service must be provided, and we provide others in addition. It turns out that providing others, there are employees who select some of those other plans that save them money and save the town money. And so your question also relates to, how many plans and what kind of plans you offer, what your healthcare costs are. Ours actually went down by offering some very untraditional plans.
Okay, and then one follow-up. When they hit age 65, don't they all go on to Medicare?
The majority of them go on to Medicare, but some employees are not actually eligible for Medicare.
I thought, correct me if I'm wrong, I thought everyone at hit age 65 could start paying.
No, you might have certain, if a town employee was here going back into prior to maybe 1978 or 1982, I forget the exact year, they have never contributed to Medicare. And if they don't have a spouse who contributed to Medicare, when they retire, they are not eligible for Medicare Part B benefits. They might be eligible for Medicare Part A, but the Part B benefits they're not eligible for. So there are a handful that still fall into that category. Not very many, but there are a handful.
Okay, thank you.
So, my question, and I don't know if it's Tom or Paul who had to answer it, but on page 7 of the presentation, there's, if you go about halfway down, under the uses summary, there's a $34,700,000 number for schools. And I guess I'm just interested in, what does that number represent? Is that something that the school, I don't know, Tom, you've come up with, or the school committee has come up with, or Paul, you came up with based on?
I came up with it.
Okay, that's, okay.
Yep. And again, it's based upon a breakdown that if you look at page 9,
Yep,
there is a salary component and an expense component.
okay. So, I take it this is just your best estimate of what you think FY15 would be?
It's the starting point, correct.
And Tom, have you looked at that number? I mean, have you assessed it, or is this to be done?
Paul's assumptions, I think, are the best guess we can make at this time, without getting into the full-blown, starting to look at staffing and making those actual projections, which we usually start in December. I'd have to agree that it's the best starting point to use at this point for this high-level discussion.
Richard?
Paul, normally the budgets run 82, 87% personal services. Do you know what we are town-wide schools included?
Again, on page 9, there's a summary of expenditure by category, towards about 2/3 of the way down. Salaries are 34, again, I'm looking at the last column, FY15. We can look at 14, which is probably a more accurate figure. I'll use the 14 number, but 33.5 million out of $60 million budget.
Does that include benefits, Paul?
That does not. Employee benefits are by themselves at 7.3 million.
So then that's 40 million?
40 million plus out of the 60.
Any other benefits paid on the personnel side?
They would all be part of that employee benefits section. So they're all going to be found in the salary line or the employee benefit line. There's no other that are really hidden.
55.3%, Rich.
How much?
55.3%.
55. Okay, it's very,
That's
very...
just salaries, that's
Yeah.
not salaries and, but is that salary and benefits under salaries, or that's just salaries?
What number did you take, the 33.5?
33.5, right.
Right, that's just salaries, that does not include benefits.
That's the 7.
So that's
Okay.
55.3%.
Yeah, plus the benefits, huh?
Right, when you include benefits, you're over 40 million on the $60 million budget, you're
Right.
at 66+%.
Yeah, 66+%. There's also an alarming trend that's taking place nationwide, and I was wondering if we're feeling any impact here. They say that retirement or medical-type retirements are on the increase from people filing for disabilities. Are we seeing any increase in that action going against our budgets?
I wouldn't say we have a lot, we just had one recent one in the fire department, but I don't see a lot. I mean, we have one every 3 to 5 years, maybe. I don't see an alarming increase in that area.
So there's nothing showing up on the trend analysis that
No.
we should be concerned about?
No.
Yeah. Thank you.
I have a question, sort of, from what Richard's talking about, stepping back on what is a best practices or a healthy budget. Is there a percentage we should be aiming for in regards to stabilization fund or debt service? And how are we looking health-wise?
There is a draft policy that I prepared, approved by the Finance Committee, that our reserves, at this point in time, reserves are being defined as the combination of free cash and the stabilization fund. That our reserves would fall into the category on the lower end of the range that is in that reserve draft policy. I believe it runs from 6 to 10%. We're roughly just at about the 6% as of July 1st, 2013.
And what about debt service?
Debt service, actually, surprisingly enough, we're still on the low end of debt service. I look at what the rating agencies have as far as when they look at debt service, what is high debt service versus what is manageable debt service. We're still in the area of very manageable debt service. We're not in any extreme case at this point in time.
Oh, good. Thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if it's not the time to start talking as a joint group of committees here, and this is about how we address the biggest issue here, which is employee retiree benefits and other things. And I understand that it gets into negotiations and it gets into a lot of things, and having sat through negotiation sessions myself, I understand our desire to pay our employees and a fair and equitable wage and give them benefits that are meaningful. But if the benefits that the town has been providing no longer represent what society is doing in general outside of the town, we may want to start talking about that. And it needs to be done jointly. It can't be done unilaterally. And by that, I'm looking at things like, do you raise the retirement age? Do you change what employees can do what percentage of the insurance they pay for as they go down the road? Right now, we've got a split between town payment and employee payments. And it's something that I think we need to understand what those variables are, number one, and number two is which of those variables are part of collective bargaining and which aren't, because I know a lot of retiree variables are not. They're dictated by the state. I also know that the school department and school committee have teachers are under a different retirement plan and may not necessarily fall under the same things as the town does. But I think at some point, we've got to come to grips with the private sector is no longer having people retire at age 55 with 10 years of work history with the kinds of benefits that people can from the town. And if we can change that over a period of time with our contract negotiations, I think I know that I'm going to get a lot of flack for it, but it behooves us to start talking about it. We've got to set a framework with the knowledge of what we're doing. That's the only way we're going to get the long-term issues of this budget under control, because we are at 75 to 80% salary and benefits.
And if I can just ask the group, are you ready to start talking about this now, or do you have, I want to check to make sure that you're at the goal that you want to be at. Do you have an understanding of the budget before we get to this?
Becky, may I just answer some of Mark's questions?
Sure, of course.
Mark, your questions regarding benefits would have to be really specific, because there's a lot of different areas that are covered. You mentioned retirement, and the retirement is basically set up by statute.
Right.
So it's not going to be controlled at the collective bargaining thing. And I will just add, just to be brief, is that the retirement ages were just adjusted by the state to reflect with Social Security raised 67 years old. They actually just went up. So again, your questions will have to be specific in order to get to who has control, what would have to be done in order to change them.
Clearly, Paul, but my problem is, I don't think that I know what are bargainable issues that would affect our budget versus what aren't, so that when we, as a select board, give direction to the bargaining committees, whether it be the town manager or whoever it is, that we can take that into account.
And that's why I ask, if you had specific questions, can we bargain retirement benefits, or can we bargain health insurance? I would better be able to answer those if there was a more specific, direct question, as opposed to just talking generic employee benefits.
Well, and I'm not necessarily prepared to ask the questions now.
Right, no, I understand.
Discuss it now.
But in the future.
To say, certainly the split between town and employee payment is something that is a big number for us.
Yep.
Do you want to brainstorm those issues that need further understanding?
Well, I had a quick question, just.
Yeah.
What, a specific, I guess, curiosity, are we able to bargain current employees' healthcare costs? Is that included in?
I believe the collective bargaining agreement that is in place has specific percentage or cost-sharing amounts in there. So whether you grandfathered all employees and did a different cost share for new employees would be one thing, but I do believe that it is specified an HMO product is X percent and a indemnity product or PPO product is Y percent. So, but they are bargainable, but they are locked in through the collective bargaining process.
I think the state law has changed, though, so you can change plan design without bargaining. Do I understand that correctly?
The state law allowed last year, or for FY, we actually did it for FY13, that it allowed certain changes through a non-collective bargaining process up to the state group insurance commission plan, certain deductibles and certain co-pays up to one of their most popular plans. The select board and the town employees went through that process. And in FY13, we did introduce co-payments and deductibles, basically up to the GIC level. And you'll notice that if you look at the health insurance line item, it actually went down in 13. But to a certain degree, plan design it can be changed without the bargaining process, but only up to a certain level.
Yeah, I think it would be great to start a dialogue, because it really affects the school budget, it affects our budget, and there are changes we can do outside of collective bargaining, and actually changes, I think, that will help the employees and help the retirees. And so for us to actually start that dialogue and talk about it, I think would be really valuable, because if we do decide to make changes on the town side, it affects the schools, because it affects the employees. And that would be for the pension, as well as the health care, as well as the retirees. Though I did find it interesting that our OPEB retirees are more on the town side than the school side. So it seems to vary depending on what it was.
Why would you make that assumption?
Because it said here that when I was looking at the retiree health, I thought it said higher percentage town people were on it. But I think it's worth it to start the discussion. and to share, because that is the big thing that's every year going up like 500,000.
So is that something you want to talk about tonight, or is
Well,
that a future agenda
I
item?
think we could talk to the select board, maybe we're talking about a joint subcommittee, or sitting down and sharing numbers and discussing what we would like to do in moving forward. One of the things I think is very interesting is we've got this bill coming up that we've talked about wanting to talk to our delegation, and if that's something you feel we should support, and we feel we need to support those changes, we definitely might want to consider a joint letter saying, please support House Bill 59 and the changes that are coming up. But we have to really, as two boards, look at it and make sure that's really going to be to our complete advantage.
As long as I'm throwing little things into the middle of the room.
Suggesting ideas, yeah.
The other area that strikes me was something that Paul had mentioned early and kind of went without saying, and that was our salary increases. Our salary increases, he put in 3.5%, and if you recall, what he said is 2% for cost of living and 1.5% for steps. But in fact, for an employee, it's a 3.5% raise for the average employee. And I recognize that there are employees who are at maximum steps and only get 2%, but there are other employees who are getting more than that. And frequently in the past, especially since 2008, when inflation was extraordinarily low and the private sector were getting no raises, even when our employees took what we used to call zero COLAs or zero cost of livings, many of the employees, if not most of them, were still getting a salary increase year over year because of steps. I think that also ought to be addressed in our police patrol officers union contract that was just completed. We were able to negotiate a reduction of one step. Obviously, it didn't come free, but I think in the long term, it's beneficial for the town to reduce steps. I understand steps is a long-standing, pardon the expression, tradition of municipal employees and school department employees, but I think in the 21st century, the idea of steps that are extremely generous plus cost of living, and I know there's other people on the select board who agree with me, is a double raise when other people in the general community are not getting that. And I would suggest we take a look at that, of how we, as groups, bargain for and talk about steps plus cost of living.
Unless,
I'm sorry.
first, Liz, go ahead.
I agree somewhat with that, but don't you think that people in the private sector get paid a lot more? So when they don't get the raise 2 years in a row, that really, they get paid a lot more than town employees.
I think that's a misnomer, Liz. I really do. I mean, there are clearly positions, you know, a starting school teacher, there's no comparable to that. But, and I'm not saying do away with all steps, but instead of a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, you know, we started, so that we eliminate steps. I saw steps, and I said this at the bargaining unit, you know, I believe in the concept of what I'll call golden handcuffs. We ought to encourage our employees to be long-term employees, encourage them, give them a reason why, after working here 2 years, when we put in all the effort to train them and get them into what we know, they know the system and we know them, and then have them pick up and go somewhere else for $20 is stupid. So there's people ought to look forward to, if I stay here for 5 years, I'm going to get a longevity or a step increase. If I stay here for 10, I support that. It's the 1, 2, 3 years. But I'm not necessarily convinced in this day and age that municipal employees do make less than private sector employees. I know a lot of private sector employees who are not making as much money as an equivalent person. When we advertise for a job in the town, we get a lot of applicants, and it's because the salary is competitive and the benefits are phenomenal. And so I think that speaks for itself. If we were having a tough time getting jobs, if when the economy turned around, everybody's flocking out of the town to take these better paying jobs in the private sector, I think I'd agree with you, but that hasn't been our experience over the last couple of years. Just my opinion. Our HR department probably knows better.
And John, and then Steve.
Well, Mark, you've already started to say some of the things I was going to say. Part of the reason you have a step increase model for teachers is to encourage them to stay with the system and to, offer some stability to the schools. I think the model is actually based on the military, where, you go in as a private E1, and they expect you to climb to E3, 4, 5, all the way up to master E9. But then at the same time, there's a tracking for years. But an encouragement is also in our contract for teachers to improve their financial reimbursement by way of pursuing extra credit, getting a master's 15, master's 30, all of which redounds to their fitness for being in the classroom. I think you already understood that, so, and you said it. I just offer that for the benefit of everyone. That's why we have, over the years, had this step increase approach.
Stephen, and then Richard.
And thanks, John. I would just follow up by saying that, Mark and I have discussed this, to some extent there are many ways where I agree with that proposition about steps. However, in this municipality and nearly every other one that I'm aware of, there are no merit-based pay structures. And I think, and I want to make two comments. The first is, the reason why personnel costs are such a huge part of our budget is because this municipal corporation is in the business of providing services. And those services are actually provided by human beings that get paid to do it. And so I think when you look at, if you're running a private company, you look at personnel costs as 66+% of your budget, you'd say, wow, that we're really losing it. We don't have money for product development or research or marketing or anything else. Our town organization provides services. That's what we do. And those, like I said, those people, there are people that do that. And I think, the other thing I'll say is, as we talk about, I don't think there's any doubt that the environment of collective bargaining and municipal employee compensation is a dated model, and I think there are real questions, Mark, that you're, pointing to about, is it sustainable long-term, and should we be asking the question, should Long Meadow be leading the way and asking some of the tough questions about what are new models out there? But for everyone here and for anyone else to benefit, I think that it's not a reflection of a unique circumstance to Long Meadow. It is a reflection of the nature of municipal employment, municipal management, municipal budgets. I guess I won't say universally, but certainly nationwide, and I'm sure in most, places that have municipal governments that provide services.
Richard, you had your hand up?
Yeah, I did. I'll break away from this discussion. Paul, back to where we're talking about the budget for personnel and supplies and materials. I think we're running somewhere around 68%. Do we have any way of reaching out in a comparison type mode to see how we're doing to other communities our size with similar type enterprise funds and all? Is there anything out there that tells us that we're in line or out of line?
There's plenty of data on DOR websites. I know the town has what's known as a Schedule A, and it does break down personal services to other expenses by department. So if there were comparable communities that you had in mind, we could probably reach out and see what those ratios are.
Have you ever looked at this?
I have not. I have not personally looked at that type of comparison.
Okay. Do you think there's benefit to that? I mean, we say 68%, but I don't know if that's good, bad, or indifferent. I know from the federal budget process, that would be absolutely glory land if I only had 68% personal benefits. I can't imagine a budget where I had that much discretionary funds to spend.
To look at it can't hurt, but, I do also believe that every municipality is unique. And what they do, they make their own internal decisions. So I don't think you could simply look at that and pass judgment on what that ratio might be or that comparison might be.
So from a fiscal management, what process would we adopt or what we look at to know that we're going in the right direction?
I think if we're going in the right direction, I think you have to talk to your constituency. Is your constituency getting the services that they're looking for?
it's a good question, but we've also acknowledged the fact that our constituencies may not be aware of what the total backlogs are in our community, and we are. And we're not meeting that liability. And we're not even talked about that in this budget project. We talked about OPEB, but we haven't talked about the deferred liability that we've got out there in our infrastructure that is going as fast as OPEB or anything else that we're not even coming close to funding. I'm just trying to get at a basis of, there's no rulers out there that you're aware of for us to go up and say, we're gonna grade this community on how we're doing against some standards of statewide municipal governments.
Again, there's been comparisons with like communities that Long Meadow likes to compare itself to, but I think you have to really understand the details in there. I know, the Finance Committee one year started looking at a comparison for fire departments. And they started looking at, why is this fire department so much lower than the town of Long Meadow? And from the Schedule A standpoint, which I referred to before, it doesn't give you all the details. You start looking at the details, our fire department does the ambulance service. Our fire department brings in over $500,000 worth of revenue. And you have to understand all the details before you can really understand what the dynamics are of every individual community. That Schedule A is a good place to start, but then a lot of the research is going to have to be done, again, as to what those details are. Is it an apples-to-apples comparison that you're really making here, or is the comparison something that shouldn't be made because the dynamics are so much different in that community? So is it a place to start? It is, but you really got to know the details to make absolute concrete decisions based upon those comparisons.
Janet, you had your hand up too.
Based on your projections for 2015 with the 675 shortfall, and that's assuming a level funded budget, correct?
I would define it as a level service almost. It's level funded on the expenditure side, but it's more of a level service because of the contractual agreements on the salary side. Because to me, level funding is same dollar amounts.
Okay.
That's my interpretation of
So this is assuming
level
level
funding.
service?
For the most part, yes.
It builds in a salary and expenses increase.
It builds in salary increases, it doesn't have an inflationary factor in expenses, only two expenses are being modified, school utilities and high school maintenance. Those are the only two line items that were adjusted.
I'm sorry.
Okay, so in essence, at this budget with the 675 shortfall, neither, any of the departments within the community are not gaining any services, but they are not losing any services that are currently in their budgets. Is that correct?
That's the overall assumption. I think inflation would eat away at probably if they're going to lose something.
Okay.
So there's going to be a gradual loss just because of the inflationary factor.
Okay. I'm done, thank you.
So, we on the select board are going to be voting on, I think what's known as a budget directive in, 3 weeks, I think? And one of the things that I saw last year was that there was a directive by the select board, and apparently the school committee wasn't on board with it. And I always thought it would be a good idea, and I think this meeting is a great opportunity to talk about it. I mean, I guess one of the things that I'd like to hear from any school committee members is, in setting this budget directive, what do you think the select board ought to know?
I can answer that. I'm happy to answer that. I think as Paul, explained, I think at this point, the most pertinent information for you guys to know is that we are seeing an increase in cost of electricity at the high school, which is contributing to an increase in our utilities line, and we have contractual obligations to pay to our staff members. A 2% increase for a cost of living adjustment, step increases, and a lateral movement on the salary schedule for continued education. So I think that is ideally, the most pertinent information. Obviously, some of the items that were listed as question marks, as you know, we're evaluating a full-day kindergarten scenario that could cost up to $250,000. Not to mention there will be other initiatives that the admin team may bring forward. But as always, nothing is final until town meeting, so. But those are the big tickets right now, big ticket items.
A few years ago, Michael, I don't know if you were on the school committee at the time, you might have been, there was a request to consolidate utilities from the town side, and the school committee asked not to have that happen. My contention was that we could buy electricity cheaper if we could buy it for one lump sum. I'm wondering now, with potentially seeing an increase, if the school committee is willing to now reconsider and have that consolidation take place, and move over to the same system as we now use for municipal benefits, that it's all in a centralized location to give us a chance at better buying it. Just because here it is going up, and I know we've been talking to people with net metering system and all this other stuff that keep saying, well, if you had a bigger pot, you could get a better deal.
I don't think it would be inappropriate to say we may be willing to take a second look at it.
Yeah, I'll give an answer tonight. I'm just saying.
I mean, I would say we're happy to take a second look at that and get back to you.
If I could, though, Tom, aren't we contractually tied up for a couple of years with our current electricity provision? And I'll stipulate, I think our electric use is outrageous. I've asked some questions about it, but we do have to get electricity and don't we have a special contract?
We have a contract that runs through January 2015.
2016?
15.
Okay.
The town's in a similar contract.
Ours runs to November 15.
But they're very close together.
2 months apart.
So, just to clarify, this is an issue that, Michael, you said you're willing to look at?
I think it's worth a second
look at for
look.
later.
Yeah.
I just want to talk to the other school committee members. They're getting some nods, so it seems like it's not a decision, but is it something that for the future?
We could look at it.
We can look at it.
I think it would be anything that we could do to save money.
Okay. Alex had his hand up, and Stephen, I don't know.
So I guess last year, there was this notion, of course, labels can be a little misleading sometimes, this notion of a zero budget. And I've heard reference to, in years past, there's been discussion of level funded, level service. Recently on the select board, there's been a notion of a zero-based budget. I think Paul Santinello was talking about that, which is sort of a different concept, which is you sort of start from zero. He could probably explain it better than me, but you start from zero and you have to justify every single thing. So you don't start with the assumption of, well, you get what you got last year, you start with that. So I guess, to me, like that sort of underlying assumption or principle is going to go into what we're thinking about when we set this directive and sort of what this town meeting budget's eventually going to look like. And, I guess I would, to me, I like the concept of a level service budget, because I don't want to see the town get worse, because I feel like if we get worse one year, we're apt to get worse the next year, and then we're sort of on a downward spiral. But I'd be interested to see how other people feel about these different principles and sort of which principle we ought to be operating under.
I'm going to go. And level service is something that school committee has been engaging in. That sort of process is something we've been engaging in for probably the last 2 years. And last year when we brought our budget forward, although it did increase, there was about $1.4 million worth of reductions that we also offered to offset that increase. We still increase it, of course, but so it's a healthy process that I don't think we've ever been adverse to. And it's allowed us to really identify programs that maybe are not beneficial, restructure them, restructure certain grade levels, so it's something that Marie has been a big advocate for over these last 2 years at least.
I think, sorry, I just want to, because Mike, you said the magic word, which I was going to say, which is offset. And I think what Paul showed, Paul and Tom both showed with the assumptions was essentially what you'd call a level service budget. based on revenue projections for next year, and it's $640,000 in the red already. And every discussion I've heard about, in the 6 months I've been here, about town services, has been one of that people want more of something. More maintenance at the parks, more kindergarten, a full-day kindergarten. I mean, people enjoy a certain high level of services, and I think they would like higher levels of, or more services and higher levels of them. That's perfectly reasonable. I just, I think my perspective as we prepare the budget on the town side is that I think the folks, especially the folks who are at town meeting, are going to have to make decisions, need to be thinking about that word, offset. Because if we want to do more of certain things, and our level service, if you will, budget is already $640,000 in the red, then that probably means you're going to have to be doing less than of something else. And I just think that that's something that people need to be, aware of as we move forward. And the final comment I'll say is, the budget can mostly be divided into fixed versus flexible. And that's how, it's a part of the approach we take, which is, there are costs that you are obligated to through contract, through debt service obligations, through things like that. We have contractually obligated personnel costs. So the wages and benefits, the rate of those things are obligated. How many people we have doing that work is something that's flexible. But if you have less people doing the work, then that generally means you have less services being provided. So I just want to kind of throw that out there as we talk level zero budget, or however you want to call it. There's still some tough choices ahead, I believe.
Okay, and there were a couple of hands before Stephen, and I also see Marie, who hasn't yet, this Marie over here, who hasn't yet spoken, and I'd like to have her speak first, and then John and Marie.
Thank you. We have tried a zero-based budget. Tom and I looked with the administrative team, and we had so many fixed costs that it left us very little room to move items. But as Michael said, we came up with $1.4 million in cuts last year. We did add back in what we needed to. We are under pressure from the Department of Education to implement certain things. Full-day kindergarten is going to come one way or another. It's right now still voluntary, but there's a push on because of the curriculum upgrades that are in the kindergarten right now. So I see that there are some things that are going to force us to struggle with a level service budget.
Yeah, I was going to just support what Michael was saying about it. It's been our goal to have a level service budget in the context of zero versus level, or a level dollar budget, and I've heard expressions like fixed dollar budget, and then zero. Well, last year, we were hit with, it's zero. Live with it. And that led us to some serious examination of our expenditures, but it also ultimately led to a conference committee, and I'm not trying to drag up a lot of other stuff, but the people left that conference committee thinking they had an agreement, and then it broke down.
So what you're saying is that...
So what I'm saying, basically, I think the schools would say if we have 200 fewer students, then seriously, we should be, we don't have to provide services for those, so our budget would go down. But we can't guarantee that the number of students goes down will reduce cost because of the special ed factor that comes in there. We might have an increase in a few students who have extremely expensive costs associated.
Thank you.
Okay.
I think what we heard today is that level service or level funding, because neither of those are possible, we're already way past that. And we've got to figure out how we're going to make this work. I would say we shouldn't even bother quibbling between the two things. We just have to sit down. It's a big project ahead of us. And the one thing I would say is my feeling is no operational override. So that's already put us 600 plus behind the line, and we got to figure out how we're going to do this. When I was looking at the budget, and I was thinking I was going to put the picture from the Petit Prince. I don't know if you've ever seen it with the elephant, the boa constrictor ate the elephant. And that's the way I feel we sort of are, in that the high schools come on board, there's extra expenses, and up till now, the town has treated that as discretionary maintenance. We can't do that. We have got to treat this as absolutely an important part, which means level service is not possible, level funding is not possible. We have got to take care of this high school. So we swallowed the elephant, we've got to spend some time working on it, and so I see it as a lot of work on our side, a lot of work on the school side to make this happen, and hearing these numbers were very sobering tonight. So I don't know where we'll go in our discussions, but that's just my feelings on either of those directives.
And just to keep in mind, we have 10 minutes left until the 9 o'clock hour, and we're, you know, we want to honor your time.
Marie, you said something that I think is most important here, and that is, you know, we've got a variance of $674,000 on these projections, and I don't think, Alex, we're going to be talking this year about level service or level dollars or level anything. I think we've got to fundamentally decide, can these joint committees get behind and support an override or promote an override? Do we think the town will vote for an override? Because we can think all we want to, but if it's not approved by town employees, or excuse me, town residents, we're going to be stuck with a $673,000 less than it takes to run the budget the way it is now. And we've got to figure it out. And so to my thinking, we've got to come up with an either-or scenario. I mean, we've got to, if in fact people believe we want level service, which is what Paul, I think, and Tom have put together here, you know, then we got to find a way to pay for it. You know, and that could be an override. It could be, see if the town wants to take money out of, excuse me, Peter, out of our reserve funds or our, you know, because I know our finance committee, it's not something we've done. This isn't necessarily a rainy day. Or we've got to come up with an alternative of taking $674,000 out of last year's budget to pay for the things that we've already committed to, which are primarily salary and higher maintenance and those kinds of things. That's the decision that we've got to come to. And we're going to either do it now or over the next 3 months. But it's going to have to happen. My personal opinion is the people in Long Meadow will not support an override. We've done a great job. The last override, I will remind everybody, passed by 1 vote. That's before the taxes went up significantly in the last couple of years.
One thing I keep hearing as I'm listening to, we have so many fixed items in our budgets, both sides of us, that we, you know, put those out there and that's what it is. It's non-negotiable. And yet we all, both sides, you know, the whole town has, you know, things that they want, the services that they're wanting and the levels that they're expecting, yet we don't have enough to pay for it. What are we doing as a town to look at ways to increase revenue?
Much
You know,
better question.
If we don't,
Thank you, Michael.
I mean, if we're looking at expenses, you know, we've got fixed expenses, but we have fixed income, then don't we need, just logically, you know, as my home budget,
Janet, this year we got $85,000 or $95,000 more in meals tax revenue, and we've been promoting, now I've been pushing things like, put up a wireless system in town and sell wireless services to residents in town that could make all these problems disappear overnight, literally. But there's all kinds of things, but we need resources to you know, I'm not gonna do that, somebody needs to do that. Some of it takes resources, but sometimes you gotta spend money to make money.
well, and perhaps my question is, where does that responsibility lie? Is that with the town manager? Is that with the select board? Is that with the finance committee? Of ways of looking, of generating income to cover our budgets?
And if I can just reflect on what I'm hearing.
Answer is yes.
You're moving beyond the basic understanding. It seems like you have the basic understanding of what the budget is, and you're ready to consider a whole range of, a variety of solutions. That's a separate process. If the select board and the school committee want to continue the collaboration, that's your decision to make. And you can continue that collaborative problem-solving together, and then have a separate meeting where you discuss your desires, your needs, your wants, and what you think the options could be. And there's separate kinds of decision-making that goes into that. Okay. Sure.
do they have auditors, consultants, someone that I know it's spending more money, but that we could hire to come into the town and kind of take a look and see if there are places that we're not aware of that we can save money? I'm just thinking, I worked for a couple of large companies that people would call very stingy, and some of the things that they did to save money was payroll once a month, and they made everyone go to direct deposit, and no one got checks. Are we looking at tiny little things like that?
I would say yes. And on a, I don't want to say daily basis, but certainly weekly basis, things like a position comes open, can we find a qualified applicant at less than the previous person was making, which to some extent is, if you want the best people in your organization to provide the highest services the most efficiently, it's kind of a race to the bottom, but it is one flexible way we have to reduce our budgets. We look at, listen, if there's an idea that comes up that seems good and it seems could either provide more efficient, better services for the same money or reduce our overall expenditures, we drill down into it as best we can. And I think the thing is, for a variety of complex factors, a lot of times not all that glitters is gold with these types of things. I think everybody is on direct deposit already. And so the easy things we can do.
I hear a no over here.
Sorry. Well, I think, like I said, there are things we do, like I said, regionalization of certain functions. I mean, we explore any good idea to do that. It just is, sometimes you either hit a wall where you require a level of expertise to be brought in that we don't have the money to procure, or for either collective bargaining or mass general law circumstances, it just doesn't fit. But like I said, the answer is yes, we do it constantly because the pressure is on us to deliver a balanced budget and continue to provide services for the money we have.
I think there's a lot more we can do. We're looking at them, and implementation of technology and using payments online and all of this. So I think the select board's understanding that, the town manager understands we've got to start pushing that ball down the road. And just like the school committee has been getting other sources of revenue through LEAP and not just grants, but contributions with the new high school, we're trying to find other sources in order to bring it in, because we can't keep depending on property taxes. It's not going to work. And anyone who has ideas on how to make savings, I mean, there's even contests on how to make savings in federal government. We're always open to ideas and implementation. The problem is, as soon as we start to come up with how we're going to save a little bit here and there, some other extra expense comes up, that whether it's a new crossing walk or something else that we want to put in. So it's chasing the ball rolling down the hill.
But Marie, we've come up with ideas like buying streetlights. I mean, I've been on the select board for 4 years. We started talking about it 4 years ago. Buy the damn streetlights. We spend $475,000 a year in rent and lighting the lights. If we bought them, which might cost us $1 million or $1.5 million, okay, those expenses can go down to $200,000 a year for lighting them. That's saving $250,000. Now, that's not all. That's $250,000 a year. But we have not moved off of that dime. Why? I'm part of the problem. We've got a million reasons. Let's move off of that dime. And then there's 3 or 4 more dimes we've identified. So I think to Janet, the answer is, other than the finance committee, it is the select board and the town manager who's charged with getting more revenue, and we ought to be doing it.
Can I follow up on that point, Mark? I think, and I'll ask Paul and Tom to give me their feedback on this, because I've only been here a short time. Mark, you talked about how there hasn't been an override in quite some time, which essentially means that notwithstanding debt service for specific things like the high school, operational revenue has only gone up 2.5%. I don't think, it's probably safe to say that operational expenses have gone up, the cost of specific things has gone up greater than 2.5% in most years. The reason why the town has been able to absorb cost escalations beyond revenue expansion is because we've been finding ways to do things better, cheaper, more efficient. We haven't cracked the big crack the big egg like you just suggested streetlights. I think because it's one of those things where the electric company, MECO, if they want $3 million for the streetlights, it's not a savings. And I think we keep bumping into there, and that's where the level of complexity of these types of big scale ideas sometimes does get beyond us. But like I said, we've been every little way we can do it internally. And I guess, Paula, would you agree with that or disagree?
Yeah, I would agree. We have looked at things, some of them pan out, some of them fizzle, they go off into the darkness for whatever. There are a few things coming. I mean, that net metering credit, the facility is currently under construction right now, so we will be getting some monies back in that regard. We don't discount ideas automatically. They are explored. The problem is that most of them are small-time monies. And there's a couple big things out there, but again, those are the ones that just have not been implemented.
From the discussion tonight, however, it seems as though the two boards are willing to continue talking. Is that a correct assumption?
I'd say so.
Yeah. Continue talking and continue having some brainstorming sessions where you're working on revenue increases and then building action items after that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate your work here, Rebecca. As you can see, you surrounded the wall. And everyone coming together, and especially I want to thank Paul and Tom. That was a phenomenal amount of work that was put into that presentation. And I feel like we have some numbers, and I was really educated not just by the numbers, but by the process and best practices, and I found this very invaluable tonight. Thank you very much for your work.
And this will be made available electronically to us as well.
We can post it if it's there.
I just want to, again, follow Marie's thoughts, and thank you for your leadership tonight and making sure that this meeting ran smoothly, and I think it has been a beneficial process for all of us, and I, hope I'm speaking on behalf of the committee, on the school committee, when I say that we look forward to continuing this process and this conversation.
I agree.
So.
Motion to adjourn?
Yes.
Second.
All those in favor? Thank you very much for coming, and thank you for joining us.
That's how we fund it.
Good job.